Today we're going to be focusing on the Salamanders and why they're quite so scarily strong in 40k right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now with the meta beginning to shake itself out, the strongest combos are certainly emerging, and it seems that the 40k community are settling on Salamanders as the army to beat in 9th edition right now. In this video we'll look at what's turned their fortunes around from 8th edition to 9th edition, and then talk about some of their various tricks and scary combos, so you might be a little bit more informed when you do find yourself facing up against them across the other side of the table. So I'll have to admit I really did quite like the Salamanders options when they came out in 8th edition. Most of their scariest tricks and options have been around in the game for quite some time now. I think they've always been incredibly powerful, just maybe not quite as easy to use as some of the other armies that were dominating 8th for Space Marines. Salamanders just didn't see as much play because they were overshadowed by Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Imperial Fists, all of which have received some reasonable nerfs. Iron Hands have taken quite a lot of successive nerfs to try and finally bring them back into line with other factions. Raven Guard had some tricks taken away with their sneaky Centurions, plus the Centurion points hike really killed that kind of build in competitive play. And the Imperial Fists took a very big hit with the loss of All-Game Devastator Doctrine. At the moment I currently feel it might be Iron Hands and White Scars that are the closest rivals to Salamanders. In 8th, Salamanders I think suffered from having an absolute ton of raw strength, being able to really dish out a lot of pain and take a lot of damage, but all of it was very problematic to actually get into the face of the enemy, just due to them being very short-ranged and fairly slow-moving, and not having any sort of option for teleporting their generic units into battle. For example, Salamander's Flamer Aggressors are ridiculously scary, but often wouldn't be able to bring their immense damage to bear. Finally, in 8th, Melter and Flamer weapons were generally overcosted. Basically, if they were strong in Salamanders and pretty much nowhere else. And now 9th seems to be rebalancing these somewhat. A lot more armies might just use them as the generic strongest option anyway, so Salamanders getting a buff to the strongest option kind of doubles down and actually makes them good, rather than just trying to make the Melters and Flamers catch up. I think that 9th has fixed quite a lot of these issues, most importantly the trouble of bringing the Salamander's short-ranged weaponry to bear. In the new missions we tend to be scrapping for the centre of the table, and durable, short-ranged, very hard-hitting units are absolutely great. It's what's made armies such as Death Guard and Custodes pretty scary to fight against these days, and slow-moving, resilient Salamanders with some scary weapons brought to bear have a similar sort of effect. In 9th you need to get onto the objectives early and then stay there all game, which means the opponent's often going to have to come to you and face the wrath of your Flamers and Melters. Strategic reserves are the other side of this coin. Even if it just allows Salamander's players to put 1 or 2 units outflanking, then it could allow them to get a pretty much guaranteed shot off with Flamer Aggressors or some other hard-hitting units that otherwise might have struggled to get into range to get to its ideal targets. Next, of course, Eradicators have been introduced. They're one of the strongest units in the entire game right now, and their very strong melter weapons synergize great with the Salamanders. I think Space Marines in general have typically gained strength from the points changes, having some very solid troop choices, very scary units such as Relic Contemptor Dreadnoughts. And finally I think command points have really played a big deal in the change for Salamanders, because they have so many strong stratagems and options, and now they get a lot more stratagems to use them. It just makes the entire army a lot more robust and scary as a result. You're going to be able to pull off more of their very scary combos. So what are the actual units and tricks that Salamanders might be bringing to bear in games now? Obviously just taking strong units is not a bad idea. As well as Eradicators and Relic Contemptors that we've mentioned, Grav Cannon Devastators are also a reasonable option, and combining Gravitic Amplification with +1 to wound and the stratagem to fire them as if they stood still. In terms of actually fielding Salamander's armies, I think that in general people are going to play more successor chapters when they're playing completely competitively. The main draw to actual Salamanders is their unique characters, Vulkan Hestan and Adrax Agaton, both of whom are decent, but I'm not sure they're necessarily worth giving up the more tailored successor chapters that you can get. For example, Long Range Marksman for +3 inch range is absolutely great on the shorter range weapons that the Salamanders like, plus the generic strong combos such as Stealthy for keeping most of your army with a cover save, and the Master Artisans which can just replicate the Salamanders rerolls anyway. They've got lots of cool stratagems for specific units and builds, but some of their generic ones are really powerful as well. Crucible of Battle gives you +1 to wound, and you can use it on any attack that you want, even with a potentially enormous unit, so you could be getting loads of extra damage for just 1 command point. It's very much point and click to make sure that the most important enemy threat dies, or just to amp up the firepower of your scariest unit. Self-sacrifice is another stratagem that can be used to protect allied infantry units. This one can give you some very silly situations where you might not be able to target an entire unit of Centurions or something because you have some intercessors in the way, and it could be used with some other Imperial threatening firepower units, say things like Admech Cataphron destroyers. Allowing one of these units to basically fire twice over the course of a game completely unmolested by enemy firepower is really quite good. Finally, Born Protectors is a real curveball that can screw up your opponent's charge phase. Basically, this is the one that allows any Salamanders units to do a 2d6-inch heroic intervention after your opponent has charged one of your friendly units. It basically helps prevent the Salamander's opponent from picking and choosing their own fights, and it means that if you have an isolated weaker unit on the outskirts of your army, then you could potentially bring in a very heavy-hitting close combat unit to help win that fight. It really can be devastating if the opponent doesn't see it coming. Next, they can get a near unkillable Biker Captain combo, combining the Salamander's Mantle for -1 to wound, and also the Master of the Forge Warlord trait to get the Bike Captain up to toughness 7, it means that even things like assault cannons are only going to be wounding you on 6s. If you combine that with a Storm Shield as well, then it means that you just have an incredibly obnoxious to remove character, and you can be swinging away with a Thunderhammer with all the Salamander's rerolls, so it's not really a threat you can ignore. Salamanders also have a stratagem to stack an additional Warlord trait on the same character. You could choose either to get him objective secured, so basically be guaranteed to hold an objective for a turn or two, or you can just increase his toughness even further by giving him a 6+ feel no pain type save, and also allowing him to regenerate wounds each turn. Finally, if your Smash Captain of Death does happen to die, then you have a stratagem for 2 CP to give him a chance to get back up again, and continue his rampage for another turn of carnage. Next we have the Obsidian Aquila, which is one of my favourite relics from the Codex. This one's very near in auto-include territory, you can buy it in for 1 command point, and it gives your infantry units an aura of 6+ feel no pain. Often you see chapters buying in the Chief Apothecary from Faith and Fury to be able to give their infantry units the same ability, so being able to give your battle line the same ability for just 1 command point is an absolute steal. Salamander's Psychic isn't bad either, they've got 2 very nice psychic powers. Fire Shield and Greatskin can be combined to give any one unit +1 toughness and -1 to hit in the shooting phase, and I'd argue Salamanders have one of the better librarians that Space Marines can field right now. Finally, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Salamander's Aggressors, which they have an absolute ton of synergy with. Salamanders have a stratagem to allow a unit to fire as if stationary, which means that their aggressor units can potentially move and then double tap their weapons, much like the Ultramarines. Honestly, I think that this is easily strong enough just to justify on the Boltstorm aggressors in themselves, and I wouldn't say that Salamander's players always have to take the Flamestorm aggressors, though obviously they have lots of advantages of their own. Big units of Flamestorm aggressors turning up on the enemy's flanks via strategic reserves could potentially melt pretty much whatever they get their hands on. Using Flamecraft for 2 command points, they can get max shot with their flamers, which when combined with the firing as if stationary stratagem means they'll be guaranteed a casual 144 strength 4 AP-1 hits. All those hits will have +1 to wound as well if they're in the tactical doctrine for Salamanders, so we're pretty much going to do hefty damage to whatever target they fire at, whatever it is in the game. And then if they do happen to survive till multiple turns after that, you've got other stratagems that can make even a lone aggressor pretty scary. For 1 command point, the Fires of Battle I think it is, gives you one that can stack up to 3 mortal wounds on a unit, in addition to the standard flamer damage. And if your aggressors get tagged in close combat, then again for 1 command point, you can just flame away in combat, trading your flamers to be pistols. I do know all of these combos sound very scary, and bear in mind that it's going to be a bit of a struggle to do literally all of them in the same army, just due to points and command point restrictions. I'm not going to lie though, there are a lot of very, very powerful options. Obviously things might change significantly in the new Space Marine Codex, but in general I think we've got reason to think that the future will still be looking bright for the Sons of Nocturne. The only obvious nerf that I've seen so far are that Salamander style rerolls seem to be going to just rerolling the wound roll and not the hit and wound roll anymore, which I think will likely be ported over to Master Artisans, making it not so much of an auto-include anymore. It might mean that other successor chapter options are taken just a bit more than normal. However, they will be doing very well out of Games Workshop's confirmed Melter and Flamer changes. Multi-Melters going to 2 shots look like they're going to be generically scary on pretty much any army, so Salamander's affinity with Melter weapons is only going to be a good thing. We might actually see things like drop pod multi-melter devastators, or maybe invader ATVs with multi-melters. Finally, Flamers going to 12 inches means that things like Flamestorm aggressors or outflanking units with Flamers are going to be that bit more scary, and it also reduces the need for long-range marksman as a successor chapter trait. Being able to just guarantee piling out of a drop pod and flaming away at the enemy with some stratagem buffed Promethean fire is exactly the sort of thing that the Salamanders will enjoy. So I hope you've enjoyed a little rundown of why I think that Salamanders are doing quite so well in 9th. If there's anything I've missed, or if you've got any experience playing with or against them, please let us know your insights down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll be continuing our look at 40k tactics pretty much every day. If you have been enjoying the videos and would like to help support the channel, then I'd just like to mention that I have a Patreon link which is down in the video description below. It is what allows me to focus on this as quite so much of a full-time thing, so if you're getting good value out of these videos, then any support is greatly appreciated. Channel patrons get to see one video early each week, there are regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the channel prize draw each month with a chance to win some very big kits indeed. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.